In this episode of Occult of Personality podcast, an interview with author Gary Lachman about his recent book, The Secret Teachers of the Western World. I'm your host, Greg Kaminsky, and you can find the website at occultofpersonality.net. Occult of Personality podcast is also available on iTunes, Spreaker, Stitcher Radio, and all the best podcast channels and apps. Follow Occult of Personality on Twitter and Facebook to get all the latest updates on new episodes and more. Occult of Personality podcast is made possible by you, the listeners, and by the subscribers to the Occult of Personality membership section. This episode is also made possible by additional donations from Steve, Lance, John, Jeff, Adrian, and Andrew via the donate button at occultofpersonality.net, and Craig and others who support the show via the Occult of Personality Patreon campaign at patreon.com/occultofpersonality. I'd like to remind you that although you're able to listen to this podcast at no charge, the costs for me to bring it to you are significant. I need your financial support now more than ever. If you're willing, consider supporting Occult of Personality by joining the membership section or donating via the donate button on the occultofpersonality.net website, or via Patreon at patreon.com/occultofpersonality. If you find these interviews interesting, informative, inspiring, and thought-provoking, please commit to helping me continue bringing you this podcast. And if you're already supporting the show or have done so in the past, my heartfelt thanks, and I salute you. Occult of Personality podcast is also sponsored by Miskatonic Books, an online store that focuses on the esoteric, occult, ceremonial magic, Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, witchcraft, the Golden Dawn, as well as dark fantasy, classic horror, and supernatural fiction. They carry books by all your favorite esoteric publishers as well. Just visit miskatonicbooks.com. Temple of Thelema is a true outer order of the greater mysteries, providing ceremonial initiation, structured training, and regular group work, all in conformity with the principles of the Book of the Law. An investment of time, effort, and commitment is expected from each member. Each is expected to aspire fervently to the great work, to dare, with courage undaunted, to perfect that work, and ever to apply his or her best effort to effect harmony within the order and within the world in general. Founded in service to the AA, College of Thelema seeks to guide the student to an understanding of the law of Thelema. Most especially, this means a deeper understanding of oneself and of one's true will. A combination of instruction techniques is employed, including seminars, written texts, and individual work. For over 40 years, College of Thelema has published journals in the Continuum and Black Pearl, as well as several books on occult subjects maintaining high standards in Thelemic education. Visit Temple of Thelema at www.thelema.org. Now, in episode number 165, an interview with acclaimed author Gary Lachman about his recent book, The Secret Teachers of the Western World. I enjoyed this most recent book by Lachman because of the way he explores the history of Western esotericism by walking the line between advocate and scholar with ease. I also thought the underlying narrative about human consciousness was masterful. I think this book deserves a place on your shelf, and from our conversation, you'll understand the depth of Lachman's knowledge about his subjects. I highly recommend The Secret Teachers of the Western World. Gary Lachman is one of today's most respected writers on esoteric and occult themes. His many books, including Madame Blavatsky, Aleister Crowley, Swedenborg, Jung the Mystic, and Rudolf Steiner, have received international acclaim. A founding member of the band Blondie, Lachman has been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He lives in London, and you can find his website at garylachman.co.uk. Gary Lachman, I want to welcome you to Occult to Personality podcast. It's wonderful to speak with you today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Greg, for having me on.
It's my pleasure. Today we're going to speak primarily about your most recent book, The Secret Teachers of the Western World. But before we do, I wondered if you just might give us a brief bio and background.
All right, Greg. Well, I'm the author of several books about sort of the meeting place between, say, consciousness studies, culture, and what we call the Western esoteric tradition. And I've done biographies of some of the main figures involved in that, people like Rudolf Steiner and Madame Blavatsky and C.G. Jung. And I've also written broader, longer sort of studies of the influence of the occult and the hermetic on literature, politics, and also on the pop culture in the 1960s and 70s. And my most recent book, as you say, Secret Teachers of the Western World, is a sort of overview of the history of the West, as seen sort of through the history of the Western esoteric tradition. And it kind of brings together many of the different sort of streams of studies, things I've been developing over the last about 15 years or so since I've been doing this. And another thing is, in a previous life, I was a rock star. Well, not really a rock star, but I was a musician.
I'd say a rock star, yeah.
Well, I don't know. I was never quite a rock star. It was because I touched the hem of stardom. No, but I was as you may know, I was in a band called Blondie back in the early CBGB days, and onto the first couple albums, and then had my own band for a while, and played with Iggy Pop for a while, and then dropped out of that in the early '80s, and then did this transformation into being a writer on these subjects.
Do you mind if I ask if there was anything in particular that was the impetus for that change?
Well, basically that I didn't get a record deal when I had my own band. I mean, that's what I was wanted to do when I left Blondie. And I had my own band called The No for a while, and the name came from my interest in this sort of stuff. I mean, I was already reading about this kind of thing, No from Gnostic and Gnosticism and Gnosis and all that. I mean, I'd already started reading about this sort of stuff when I was playing in Blondie. I mean, in fact, that's the story. That's how I got introduced to it. I was living on the Bowery in this ramshackle loft space with Debbie Harry and Chris Stein, the singer and guitarist in Blondie, just a block or so from CBGB. And one of the people who lived there, in fact, he just recently passed away, sadly, was interested in Crowley and in the tarot and in different things about the occult, and he was a very flamboyant, artistic character. And I just got very interested. So I was reading about this stuff throughout all that time. I mean, my song, I'm Always Touched by Your Presence, Dear, which was a sort of big hit in the UK, in Europe. It's about these telepathic experiences I was having with my girlfriend at the time, and so on. So that interest was always there, but, the sort of my early days, I was, musician, so I was pursuing that. Mm-hmm. And when I gave that up after, I retired officially after I played with Iggy Pop for a year. I mean, I write about all this in a book that's is about that. It doesn't have anything to do with the occult and stuff like that. Although I talk a little bit about it in there. But a book called New York Rocker: My Life in the Blank Generation, and it was all about my involvement in Blondie, and I drop many names in there and tell all and all that kind of thing. No, I just got tired of playing it, basically. I was doing it for quite some time. Mm-hmm. And then I just became more and more interested in the things I was reading about and wanting to pursue those. And my ideas and what was sort of motivating me seemed to grow beyond what I could say in a pop song, put it that way. Not to put, pop songs down. I love them and all that, and I'm very glad I was involved in that. But, I just sort of outgrew that way to express things, and then conveniently couldn't get a record deal anyway.
So. Everything kind of worked in harmony. That's really interesting, I think, because from your books, this is not the first I've read. You have a really, I think, deep kind of scholarly approach. Not kind of scholarly; it is a scholarly approach. Whereas many people who are very interested in these subjects from a personal point of view, I think, don't produce works with quite the objectivity that you do. I don't think.
Well, I guess it all depends. I mean, I started out as a naive enthusiast, when I first was reading about this sort of thing in 1975, when I was 19. And, for a while I did practice some of the stuff, and I was involved with some groups when I lived in Los Angeles. But I'm an inveterate reader, and the more I read, you could start to tell the difference between sort of just kind of, sensational, fun read books, and other books that are, just there's more intelligence behind them and what they're saying and so on. I mean, a writer who influenced me a great deal is Colin Wilson, who died a couple years ago. Mm-hmm. And his most famous book is The Outsider, but also his book The Occult, came out in the early 70s. Mm-hmm. When I first read that, when I was living on the Bowery in 1975, and I had no interest in the occult or the paranormal or anything like that. I mean, the only thing close to it, I was interested in weird fiction like H.P. Lovecraft, and so Arthur Mack, and I had read him, and I knew he was involved in magic, but I wasn't interested in it myself. But after I read Wilson's The Occult, and then was in this sort of milieu there in this place we lived where the stuff was around. It opened up this whole area, and there was a lot of that stuff available at the time, and it was not expensive. Mm-hmm. So I was able to indulge this interest, and it just gradually became, there was always something else to read, and then I began to see it in a broader historical kind of context. Maybe a few years after I was reading and experimenting with things and so on. So it took quite some time. I mean, I didn't start writing about it or anything getting published that I wrote about it until the early 90s. Mm-hmm. So there was a good sort of 10-year break between when I dropped out of music and then when I just started, to do little bits of book reviewing and article here and there. And then there was like about another 10 years before sort of the first book came out.
Yeah, and it's been quite a run since then, I would say. Yeah, I've been actually wanting to talk with you for some time, and I really think that this book really is a really great opportunity because it's, in my opinion, one of the best surveys of the Western esoteric tradition or traditions that I've seen by focusing on individuals and their histories and their ideas. But even more than that, what I love about this book is that it's not just a history and a narrative. You've kind of woven many significant streams of philosophy and ideas, really amazing ideas throughout it. I think the place I'd like to begin, if you don't mind, is talking